Hi everyone, my name is Davide Stronati and I'm here today to talk to you about the engineering contribution to addressing climate change. And I will do this with support of few slides. So as I said, my name is Davide Stronati. In Mott MacDonald, I'm the Global Sustainability and Climate Change Leader. But equally, I have a role to play in two very important institutions. One in the UK, the Institution of Civil Engineers. I'm the chair of the Sustainability Leadership Team. And within the World Federation of Engineering Organizations, I'm the chair of the Committee on Engineering Environment, covering the SDG 13 on climate action. So today I will split the presentation into three different sections where I will touch on the paradigm shift we are living related to climate change, the response to this shift and to this major issue we are all living. And also we'll look at the climate change and the UN Sustainable Development Goals to see the relationship and how WOFIO is responding to the climate change emergency. So first of all, let's touch very briefly on the paradigm shift we are living. It is undoubtful that 20 years ago, climate change was not on the top of the agenda of any government. It was a matter of maybe some more progressive civil society movements, the media, but immediately 10 years after was the business that was looking at climate change as a great leveler, as the Financial Times said some 11 years ago. So the business was considering how they should address climate change. 10 years after, very recently, we are all living the fact that something called Extinction Rebellion, which is a civil society movement very active across the world that wants to see real action on climate change. We need to curb the emissions and we need to get to net zero by 2050. So we are still the full loop of the civil society movement, but this time we have governments and business and civil society and the society in general very, very adamant to make a change on addressing the climate emergency. And this is very clearly demonstrated by this graph, where, there's been a survey understanding how much men and the human activities are affecting climate change. And there's no doubt that across all the different countries, there's a strong belief that it is up to us to look after our planet and our people. So it is us that we produce climate change. It is the result, and it is going to be up to us to sort it out. We already are very familiar with what climate change is bringing, extreme weather events, and a change in the pattern from floods to droughts to ice caps and glaciers that are melting with the rise of the sea level, and also extreme snowstorms. This is going to put pressure on our food and water system, not just within countries, but among countries. And this clearly is going to bring political instability. Drought and famine are going to bring riots. And this is becoming a national security concern as well as an ecological concern. We are going to see an increased risk on human health because effectively all the water and vector-borne diseases will be accelerated and spread across the globe because of climate change. And finally, lastly, but not less importantly, is bringing great stress on the wildlife and ecosystems as well. So just one minor explanation related to why it is important that we keep the rise of the temperature to 1.5 and not 2. Well, the main aspect to understand is that small changes in the mean of an increase can produce large changes in magnitude of events. So this is what this graph is basically saying. we do need to keep increase of the temperature to the bare minimum. And also what the IPCC is saying, we are going to see an increase in the frequency of these major events from 1 to 100 years to 1 to 1 year. So every year we are going to live the kind of extreme weather events we were used to live every 100 years. And this is remarkably scary. So what is the response to this very, worrying and concerning climate change set of events? Well, fortunately, we are seeing that the opportunity for action is split into three different fronts. We need to increase the energy efficiency of our systems, our economic systems. We need to decarbonize the world energy systems with more renewable and more carbon capture and utilization and storage. And we need to change the land use and management of agriculture and forestry. Energy is particularly important in the climate change, in our development, economic development, but sustainable development of our societies. And this graph is clearly showing the reason why, because, for instance, in the Chinese context, China is going to increase quite substantially the demand for energy in the next 30 plus years. This graph, again, I chose it and I wanted to share with you because it's again showing the fact that 75% of the greenhouse gas emissions by economic sector, whether they are direct or indirect, are related to engineering sectors, whether they are energy, whether they are transport, whether they are industry. Engineering has a fundamental role to play to provide technological and technical solutions that will address climate change. In the UK, where I'm based in London right now, we produced a few years ago the infrastructure carbon review. If infrastructures are the backbone of economies, we wanted to understand whether there was a role to address climate change through infrastructures. And we understood that effectively, if we consider both the operational and the embodied carbon in the design and delivery and management of infrastructure assets, we can actually save money. They are more efficient and more sustainable assets. And this is an estimate that effectively we can save up to 14 billion yuan per year in the UK only if we consider embodied and operational carbon in asset management of infrastructure. And very recently, last year in the UK, we wanted to become net zero by 2050, which again is showing the kind of rapid pace of these changes from what a piece of research from the IPCC is saying to actually being enshrined in law in the UK. And we are not the only country on this planet. There are many more that embrace the net zero target by 2050. So achieving net zero is going to be, again, very clearly an engineering issue, an engineering challenge and an engineering opportunity. We need cleaner energy supply. Even on the hydrogen, we need green hydrogen. We need low carbon ways of producing this very important vehicle of energy. And we need to increase efficiency and flexibility. We need to reduce the demand of energy. And this, by all means, will be achieved definitely by technology in the built environment as well, with smart technologies. But we are going to see in a moment that effectively our behavioral change is fundamentally important. And finally, we need to reduce land use emissions and sequestration and increase the sequestration of carbon, because this is the third important pillar to achieve a net zero economy. So this is the graph I wanted to finally share with you regarding the response to addressing climate change. Because effectively, I've been saying that engineering and technology are fundamentally important in addressing climate change. But this cannot be done in isolation from the human aspect. We are seeing that behavioral changes in how we use infrastructures, how we live our life, and how we make our choices will have a fundamental importance on achieving net zero by 2050. So all engineering solutions will always need to bear in mind this. There will need to be engineering solutions that us, individuals, and collectively, we will be able to implement. And the final aspect in the sustainability of this challenge is that effectively reduction in CO2 doesn't necessarily imply that there's going to be a reduction in the GDP. It is the other way around. There's clear evidence that effectively in countries like the ones listed in this slide, a reduction in CO2 emissions actually was associated to an increase in the GDP. Because effectively, as I said before, we will become much more efficient as well in our processes and in our lives as a country if we are able to embrace a lower CO2 economy. So I think that the important messages of this section of the presentation is that it is possible to address climate change by reducing the carbon emissions. Engineering will be fundamental, technology will be fundamental, with behavioral changes in mind, and this will deliver a much better results also from the GDP perspective and the growth. The very final section that I wanted to share with you is about the climate change and the UN SDG, the Sustainable Development Goals, that I trust all of you have been seeing already for 5 years, because effectively they were adopted 5 years ago. And climate action is one of them, is SDG 13. President Xi Jinping in 2015, he was invited to address the United Nations, and he adopted the SDGs in China as well. He endorsed them, and he adopted them in the 2016, in March 2016, 5-year plan, which was approved. And as you can see from this slide, there are 9 key areas in the implementation of the 2030 agenda, where the area number 7 is about addressing climate change actively and integrating climate change response into national development strategies. So this is a fundamental aspect in the Chinese context as well, in addressing climate change to actually implement the 2030 agenda. And we need to bear in mind that by addressing climate change, we will also be able to achieve and address all the other SDGs to a certain extent, more or less, as this slide is showing. And the red of the cells and of the blocks implies there's an evidence of the climate change impact in the targets of each of these goals. So again, what I wanted to share with you is the importance of engineering in addressing climate change that is going to enable the achievement of the SDGs. And engineering organizations and institutions, they've been working for a while in this context. For instance, the American Society of Civil Engineers with the Canadian colleagues and the UK colleagues, they wanted to have the SDGs at the front and at the core of the Global Engineering Congress, which was held in October 2018. The World Federation of Engineering Organizations, they set the World Engineering Day for Sustainable Development on the 4th of March this year, which was the first year. And the committee that I'm chairing within WOFIO, we are looking at ways to embrace new technologies and new ways on mitigating climate change, but also new ways of adapting to climate change. And this is the reason why last year WOFIO launched the Declaration of Climate Emergency that was presented at COP25 in Madrid in December, which is an action point list of 11 points that they really want to address clearly the emergency of climate change, but equally wants to address a much more inclusive climate change strategy, where effectively no one is left behind in terms of parts of society, women, and any part of the society will need to contribute and to thrive into this low carbon future. And engineers and engineering will have a fundamental role in creating this new way of living. I'm really pleased to say that the WOFIO Declaration of Climate Emergency has been signed by very important institutions across the world. And I would like to draw your attention on the fact that China was among the very first ones to embrace it on the 24th of December 2019. As in this slide, we are seeing that Xu Hui, the executive director of the China Association for Science and Technology, embraced and signed the WOFIO Declaration on Climate Emergency. So on this note, I thank you, all of you, for your very kind attention, and I look forward to working with all of you on addressing climate change through WOFIO and CAST and all the associations that are represented in China through CAST. Thank you.